RoboCop stood out to me in a year that has so many Game of the Year candidates because it does something which I always appreciate, which is it achieves some very ambitious objectives with not a lot of resources, right? So it's like a B tier game. It's like, I think we would have called it AA back in the day, or even a B game back in the day.
It's this focused team making a game with an achievable scope that prioritizes sort of surprising interactions, thoughtful interactions over a reasonable length of time, rather than stretching something kind of ad infinitum into something that's weird and less than some of its parts. RoboCop Rogue City is like completely the opposite of that.
It's clearly like it's made by a small but passionate team in Poland. The main thing it's got going for it is the license, right? So people of a certain age love RoboCop. For years and years and years, RoboCop was like, that was the 18 film that you were allowed to watch when you were 8 years old, and it was your first experience of seeing like film violence or whatever. It's probably the first time most of us saw like drugs being taken in a film, or, you know, people getting like shot so many times that they end up as a bloody pulp. It's quite full on. It's very uncompromising. As well as that, it's also a very smart film, a satire of Reagan's America, and it takes Reagan's America and extrapolates that into sort of an undetermined future from where they were when they made the film in the late 80s. And right, if this unabashed sort of ultra-libertarian mode of capitalism just continues unchallenged into the next sort of 3 or 4 decades, what fucking mess are we going to be in by the end of it? And you know, the world of RoboCop, it doesn't look that different from the world we've actually ended up in.
It's almost like the unreleased third game in the Deus Ex recent trilogy, that it's a bit like Mankind Divided, where you're exploring Prague, solving mysteries, completing side quests. In RoboCop Rogue City, you're exploring old Detroit, solving crimes, helping people find the right VHS in the rental shop. I've seen some people say that it doesn't really have the immersive sim element of the Deus Ex series, but I think it kind of does. If you want to get philosophical about it, it kind of does that within the confines of the character. And although that's kind of slightly at odds with the idea of an immersive sim, it's exploring and extending the themes of the film and the source material, that you're almost trying to get to grips with the confines of your kind of superhero tank style character, as much as you're trying to explore the powers of that.
See what I'm talking about?
None of the RoboCop sequels really captured that. RoboCop 2 is okay, but it's kind of like a weird sort of parody of the first film. RoboCop 3 is just feels like a toy commercial more than anything else. The remake in 2014 was just a terrible piece of sort of nostalgia bait nonsense that doesn't understand the appeal of the original work on any level. But this is really distinct in that it's the first RoboCop thing since the original film that understands the appeal of RoboCop and understands what RoboCop was getting at. And it understands that RoboCop is like, as well as being a satire, as well as being hyper-violent, as well as being about a robot who is a cop, it's fucking funny. That film was funny. Red 209 shoots the guy across the table and he's just a puddle of like goo at the end of it because he's been shot by anti-aircraft guns like a North Korean dissident, and there's nothing of the guy left, and one of the guys goes,
"Somebody want to call a goddamn paramedic?"
And it's like one of the funniest jokes in the film. The way RoboCop walks is like kind of goofy, shooting someone's dick off, and there's a bit in the game that came under a lot of criticism in some of the more silly reviews. He's training like a younger officer, and some old woman in an apartment is just like, "I've lost my cat. Can you find my cat?" And Murphy's like, "This is a great opportunity to serve the public trust." And they go down to the basement and they fucking shake some boxes and they chase this cat into the basement, right? And it's funny. Of course it's stupid that RoboCop is like trying to find some old woman's cat. And loads of these negative reviews picked up on that. And they're like, "I'm fucking RoboCop. Why am I chasing some old woman's cat?" It's like, Because that is RoboCop. Like, serve the public trust. Like, that's exactly what he's doing. The entire game is about, like, do you do what's in the best interests of upholding the letter of the law, or do you do what's in the best interests of the people you are supposed to be serving? You know, and then, of course, they go down to the cat and they kick a door in, and there's a bunch of guys there, like, from a gang, and then he has to fight his way out. So it still turns into, like, a stupid sort of Uncharted-style random 20-minute shootout that you've got to get out of. And it's just brilliant. I think there's so much stuff in there that's, like, not just commentary on the things that RoboCop was about, but also about the nature of game design.
It was really elevated to a next level by having this authenticity, this thread back into the original stuff. That speaks, I think, to the passion of the development team trying to create something that is really worthwhile rather than just trying to cash in on the familiarity of the license.
And it's insane that I'm sitting here as a nearly 40-year-old man in 2023 singing the praises of a movie licensed game, because I grew up in the era where there were like 10 of those a week and they were all really shitty platformers. Nothing in these games ever related in any sense to the things they were supposed to be based on.
Rogue City thought about what kind of genre would work for the character. It's these quite self-contained, interesting systems that stack up to make something that's more special and more interesting than it maybe looks like at first glance.
There is a massive precedent for this, of course, which is the Westwood Blade Runner game, which is ancient now, but it came out like 15 years after the Blade Runner film, when the film had time to percolate as a bit of a pop culture phenomenon. It didn't do that well when it came out, the original film, infamously, but it became something that people loved, and then the video game benefited from that being like a part of the fabric of the culture of the time. And I think this RoboCop game, and certainly the Terminator game that they did, have benefited from that as well. And also they've benefited from all of those things having terrible official sequels, that they could just go in and go, we're going to just forget those bits and we're going to do the sequel that you always wanted.
You don't want to go into this like thinking that it's going to be knock your socks off quality. It's definitely one of the rough diamonds of 2023, but the development team thought very carefully about how they were going to make something that was interesting and worthwhile to play within the landscape of all of these huge games that they needed to make it stand out. It's quite old school in a lot of different senses. Most of the enemies are just the same three guys on a motorcycle, which feels very sort of 32-bit era. On the other side of it, it's this really kind of crunchy, satisfying shooter that has this like well-realized cyberpunk setting that kind of carries on and extends the themes and the satire of the source material in a way that really understands it, but also has unexpected interactions that make it a more fun game to play than it kind of has any right to be, really.
These guys have just made their name out of, like, you know, sort of classic science fiction sort of action franchises that have, like, you know, a string of terrible sequels, and they do it properly. So I'd love to see what they do with Die Hard. I'd love to see their Blade Runner game, frankly, if you're talking about films with shit sequels.